Hello, everyone. Welcome to Data Engineers Lunch number 29. Today's topic is going to be an introduction to Apache Nifi. I'll be the speaker on it today, and I'm an engineer here at Anant. Our current organizers for this event are Rahul, myself, and Josh. However, if you're interested in helping the community in this event find speakers or sponsors, you're more than welcome to. If you have a topic that you would potentially like to talk about, we have a couple speakers on here like Will, who've given presentations for Data Engineers Lunch. So if you're interested on speaking on a topic, you can reach out to Rahul, myself, or Josh, and we can get you slotted into the queue. We are a part of Data Community DC, which is a diverse and inclusive culture and organization to help bring people of all walks of life together and learn and practice data. Data Community DC is made up of a bunch of different organizations. Data Wranglers DC, which is where we host this event. We also have other organizations like Data Viz, Full Stack Data Science. If you are interested on finding other events that are in the Data Community DC, so not only our events, but any other events held on the organization, you can find out more at datacommunitydc.org. So what do we cover here? We cover pretty much anything data engineering, anything that talks ETL, data processing, data cleaning, machine learning, and the general processes that people don't necessarily talk about when it comes to data in general. So if we pick up data from somewhere, what are the processes that take place in terms of how does that get used by the end user? So a lot of times topics that we cover here are simple tools that you could use to help substantiate and improve your data pipelines and your data processes. Excuse me. And sorry, again, if you are interested in talking about something, you're more than welcome to, and you can drop an email to Rahul, myself, or Josh. This is generally a good stopping point at which we have any new members that would like to say hi and introduce themselves and say what they work with data engineering, what they hopefully hope to get out of this event. You're more than welcome to say hi, but I won't pull any teeth. All right.
And people can also introduce themselves in the chat if they're more comfortable with that.
Yep. All right. Again, I won't pull any teeth. As Will mentioned, if you're more comfortable with just saying hi and doing a quick little introduction in the chat, you can do that as well. So group rules, generally, if you have a question, this is a community. So if you are confused about something or you would like more clarity on something, don't be afraid to ask any questions. Be polite and courteous. Depending on the speaker, they may have their own rules in terms of how they will accept questions or comments. So generally the speaker will go over that once they take over. And again, because this is a community, please do share what you know with us. If you know something that necessarily wasn't touched upon and you can provide further insight, feel free to drop it in the chat or just speak up and add to the conversation. We are not. We help design, build, and manage global data and analytics platforms surrounded by the technologies of Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka. So data engineering is it's a daily grind for us. DataStax is a partner and a sponsor. GW University is also a sponsor. They help us have venue space when we're doing these events in person. As the US starts to open up again, we might start exploring in-person events, but still keeping everyone's safety is the #1 priority. All right, we have some institutional and organizational sponsors as well. This is a stopping point for any announcements, anyone looking for jobs, anyone offering or hiring. Are there any meetups, hackathons, conferences that you would like to plug? I think if Mike's usually here, he usually has an event that he's usually putting on or promoting. If you don't want to speak up, you could drop something in the chat and then you can get to it at that point as well.
Yeah, hi. The company I work for is looking for a Java developer. If you want to know more, say so in the chat. That's all I can say right now.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
All right.
Yeah, if you're interested, just shoot Dan a message in chat. And Anant is hiring. We are hiring full-time or part-time positions surrounding data platform operators, engineers, and architects. If you are interested, you can find out more at careers.anant.us. Some upcoming events we have for Data Engineers Lunch. We are wrapping up the end of the month for July and we're finalizing topics for next month. So we will have those updated. But we also have a sister group for Cassandra Lunch on Wednesdays at the same time. If you're interested in Cassandra, we have some upcoming topics regarding that with Spark SQL Parquet tables and DSCFS, and also how to use secondary indexes in Cassandra. And then we will now move on to the topic for today. All right. So generally for questions or comments, I have no preference. If you have something to ask, you can go ahead and speak up. Or if you prefer, you can drop it in the chat and we can get to it at a good stopping point. But again, today's topic is going to be an introduction to Apache Nifi and how we can use Apache Nifi for data engineering. Just as a baseline, this Nifi is, you can do a lot of things with Nifi. And so today is going to be mainly about introduction into some core concepts, and then also building a very simple data flow that we could then potentially expand into other aspects of data engineering. But it's more so to get you introduced to Nifi if you've never used it before, and also how you can kind of play around with it and learn how to test flows as you go along. So what is Apache Nifi? It was built to automate the flow of data between systems. It supports powerful and scalable directed graphs of data routing, and we'll take a look at that once we get to the actual demo portion. It has a web-based user interface. So the nice thing about Apache Nifi is you can essentially build your entire data pipeline via the user interface. You don't actually have to write any physical code, at least for setting up the data flows. And it's highly configurable. And data provenance is another big thing, is where you can track your data flow from beginning to end. And as you move from step to step, you have queues. And so if you want to stop something and drill down, you can do that. And you can actually physically look at the flow file, or at least the specific record of the transfer or whatever data you're working with, and seeing as you go along what's happening to the data. And also it's designed for extension. You can build your own processors, and it enables rapid development and effective testing. So there's already a ton of processors that Nifi has in its ecosystem, and we'll take a look at that once we get to the demo portion. And also secure. You can add SSL, SSH, HTTPS, etc., and you can have multi-tenant authorization and internal authorization / policy management. So Nifi is a very useful tool if you have the right use for it. Sometimes some other tools might be better, but we'll take a look, and potentially you could use it or utilize it for your data engineering processes. So some core concepts that we're going to discuss, or at least mention during the demo, are the flow file. So the flow file represents each object moving through the system. And for each one, Nifi keeps a track of like the key value pairs and attribute strings. And we'll show you that once we get to the actual demo to see how flow files can change from one large flow file into, say, 1,000 split flow files. A flow file processor. So the processors are the things that actually perform the task or the work, doing the transformation or doing some form of transformation, cleaning, etc. And then these processors are connected to each other via essentially just a drag and drop arrow. And you can set relationships between processors. So say on success, move down, or on failure, retry. And we'll talk a little bit about that once we get to the demo. Flow controllers, it's another one where it maintains the knowledges of how processes connect and manages the threads. We won't necessarily talk too much about the controllers. Mainly we'll be focusing on flow files, processors, and process groups. So process groups, for what we're doing, you don't necessarily need a process group, but it's a way to where you can essentially create quote unquote microservices within your data pipeline. So where you can create specific processes groups for specific tasks and have them connected in some sort of manner. And then for the demo, we're going to show you how to, or actually I'll pause here, see if anyone has any questions. And then we'll move on to talking about the demo and getting started.
Looking forward to seeing the demo.
All right. So for the demo, everything is going to be done. So I've set it up via Gitpod, so that way everything can be done within your browser. So you don't necessarily have to download anything to your local machine and have potential OS inconsistencies, etc. But essentially, we're going to start with starting Apache Nifi, and then we are going to create a process group, and then we're going to create a flow, which will read a CSV from a local directory, and it'll pick it up as a whole flow file with 1,000 rows or so. So the thing about Nifi is, I believe the architecture is based on JVM. So if you don't have enough memory, there can be errors. So that might be something that plays into how you use Nifi. But Nifi can also scale, right? So you can also create clusters and have primary nodes or etc. And you can set those configurations within your process groups or within your processors in general. And so with that flow file that we picked up from the CSV, we're going to split it. So that way each row becomes its own flow file. And then we're going to create those individual flow, or we're going to convert those individual flow files into JSON format. So at this point, we can extend in a sense of what can we do? So we have 1,000 flow files and they're all in JSON format. So if we'll take a look, but there are processors in Nifi that allow you to send items to Kafka, right? So if you have some sort of Kafka topic and you want to push these records to it, that might be a possibility, and then you can continue on in your data pipeline. And then we'll also show you another functionality of how to export and import templates. So if you're using, I guess, similar or configurable process groups, or just flows in general, you can export them, import them, so you can move them around, hand it to other people. And yeah, that'll just be a basic introduction of how we can use Nifi, and then we can always expand on it at a later time. So I already have Gitpod running, and I've already downloaded Nifi onto the container. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start Nifi as well. And so there's a couple different, oh, nope, that's not the one I want. All right, let me delete this real quick. Apologies. Yeah, so as I was saying, there are a couple different ways to where you can run Nifi. So there's the background, foreground, etc. So we'll just be running it in the background. So to do that, we would just need to run bin nifi.sh. and then start. And then that will run Nifi in the background, and Nifi will open, or the UI will be accessible at 8080. And one thing to notice that at least it might be the problem with just Gitpod, but if you're doing it on local, you might not have the issue. But luckily, Nifi gives you the redirect option. So once this pulls up, we'll take a look at it. Just give it a second. And then if you want to check the status of it, you can also run the same exact command, but instead of start, you could do status. So say if you started in the background and you want to check on it, you always can. But we'll go ahead and open port 8080. And so as I mentioned, it'll say, did you mean /Nifi? So when you open up on your local machine, potentially it would be localhost 8080 /Nifi, depending on if it's if you have a cloud or a hosted cluster. So starting off, what we're going to do is, this is just the UI. So you have some just normal stuff. You can click through it. I won't necessarily go into every single thing again because this is just an introduction, and we're just going to show you how you can quickly get started. So looking at the directory structure we have this CSV directory, and we have a CSV inside of it. So if we click on the CSV, it's about 1,000 rows plus we have our header line. So it's 1,001 total. So now if we go back to Nifi, so the first thing we want to do is, how can we create a process group? So you would essentially just hover over and look for a process group, and you would drag and drop. And so this one we would just name CSV to JSON. And we'll go ahead and hit add. And so if you notice down here, if we drill down into this process group, we've gone one layer deep. But if we want to go back to the top level flow, we would just need to click on here, and we can see. So if you think about it, if you have an expanded data pipeline, you might have multiple different process groups, and that they would potentially could be connected within, see, if you drag and drop, you can connect the output of this into another process group and then continue on your data pipeline. But we'll just focus on this initial one here first. Again, you can also navigate. So if you have a very large data pipeline or flow, you can zoom out, zoom in, center, etc. And if you click out, you can also start the entire operation. This would be for the process group, but if you go up one, this would be for the entire flow. So if we go into CSV JSON, the first thing we want to do is we want to get that CSV file. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a processor, again, because remember, processors do the tasks. So again, here, as I mentioned, Nifi has a large ecosystem of things. So if you have certain processes or tools you already work with, so say if I just search for Kafka, right? And this will show you all these different things we could do. So you can even consume records from Kafka. You can also publish Kafka records, et cetera, et cetera. So as I mentioned, as an extension of to where we're getting to in this demo, we could potentially take those JSON records or flow files and put them into a Kafka queue or topic, et cetera. But what we're going to be working with mainly is just CSV and JSON. So the first thing we need to do is do a get file. And what this does is it's going to scan our local, depending on the parameters we give it, and pull the file in. So when we click on this, there are some configurations here you can mess with. And then also, as I mentioned, we have relationships. And the nice thing about what Nifi does is it has a little caution symbol that will tell you, hey, wait, before this can be turned on, these things have to be addressed. So what we're going to do here is also for scheduling. So if you don't want this to run every 0 seconds, say we want this to run every 5 minutes or so, or 6 minutes, however much 300 seconds is. So properties. So this is where we actually put in our configuration. So again, as I mentioned, Nifi, we don't actually have to do any quote unquote real coding. A lot of it, most of it can be done directly within the user interface. So the input directory we have here is essentially just the path to this CSV directory. So we're going to go ahead and paste that there, hit OK. And then we can have file filters on it. So if you have multiple files, you could also set that for batch, because we're only working with one. We're just going to set the batch size to 1. So one thing when you're working with this get file processor is to know that if you don't have, or if you want to keep the source file, you need to set this to true. Otherwise, if you have this at false and you run it, that CSV is going to be gone. So it's going to be a pain for testing. And I had to learn the hard way. So say like if you have some kind of process where you have your potentially some kind of analytics team or business analyst team in your company, and what you tell them to do is, okay, export the CSV file of this data and then put it into this directory. And so what this potential flow file or this potential data flow could do is every X seconds, look for new files, ingest it. So again, if you have keep source file set to false, it gets rid of it, right? So it'll ingest it completely. But if you want to keep them, you can do that. But if you do keep it, you have to keep in mind that you can also set minimal file ages, or you could set maximum and then file sizes as well. So that's essentially all the configuration we have to do for this. But if we want to test this, what we need to do is, let me just confirm, yep, keep source files true. What we can do is we can add a wait. We're not necessarily doing anything with this wait, is we're just going to do it so we can test the get file functionality. So for relationships, we're going to say success. And so when we do that, that's going to get rid of the caution symbol we had on get file. So now, as I mentioned, we now see this queue. So if we wanted to, and we start this individual get file, and again, with Nifi, you can pick up and stop and continue any processors in the line. So if you have something in the queue and you only want to start downstream items, you can also do that. So we see here, we have a success, we have queued 1. So if I click on this, we can just see some items about it. But if we want to see what's actually in the queue, if we right click on it and we do list queue, if we see the list queue, and if we hit this little I, we can also download what's in the flow file. But if we hit view, we'll see what's in the flow file just from the UI. And we see that it's picked up our 1001 rows. So now what can we do to this to then, let me close out of this, to essentially split it? And then how can we take those split records and convert them into JSON? So what we'll need to do is we'll need to, and also if you want to delete something like a processor, you need to first clear the queue before you can delete the relationship between them. So we'll need to empty the queue. And then I'll go ahead and stop this for now. And then we can then delete. And then once that's deleted, we can then delete this. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to drag and drop another processor, and we're going to use split text. And split text will take a text file and split it into smaller text files. So what it's going to do, as I mentioned, is take the 1,000 row CSV and split it up into 1,001 row CSV or text files. So for this relationship, we're going to do success. But then if we notice on this one, it needs to have a failure or original terminations. So this is where we can bring, or if we bring back in the wait, and we can see what the output of the split text is. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to connect this, and then we are going to do splits, because that will be what the actual splits values are. And we'll take a look at that in a second. But to then further configure the split text processor, so we need to adjust the current caution symbol. So we already have covered splits. So we say on failure, just terminate, and on original, just terminate. So then if we go into properties, so this line split count, we're just going to set to 1. And then because we have the header, we're just going to set this as 1 as well. And that's pretty much all the items we need to do for the split text. And then if we go ahead, and again, as I mentioned, if we want to start the whole thing, we can just click out. So that way no individual processor is selected. Because if I select on one, you see how it changes to the processor. So if I click out, it changes back to the process group. So then if I click run, we see that the entire flow has started to run. So we see the success happened, and then we saw the queue get picked up by split text, and now we see 1,000 splits. So again, if we want to see on this, and we click list queue, we now see 100 for now, but we know that there's 1,000 based on the queue. So if we click on the I, again, just view, see now we've kept the header as an individual row as line 2. So if we close out of this and go to this one, so this one's a biologist. And then if we click on number 2, physician. So we know our data is actually getting broken up how we want to, because again, in JSON, you need a key value, right? So the reason we're keeping the header is so we can assign the job title to the first value, employee ID to the second value, etc. You could also do this another way where you can set attributes using a different processor, but this version works just as fine. Again, because Nifi, there's a ton of different processors in the environment. There are different ways to do the same thing. So it's whatever floats your boat or whatever is optimized for your pipeline. So granted, now that we see that we have, let me go ahead and stop this. Now that we know we can get 1,000 split records, we are going to clear this queue. And we are now going to do, a convert record. So we're going to drop a new item here, and we'll do a convert record. And from here, we'll pull this down, and this will be on splits, because again, that's what we want to pass in. We'll do add. And then from here, we're just going to put this back onto the wait, and we'll do this for successes. And then on this one, if we configure it, we'll set the failure, so that way the yield will go away. And now, when you're using certain kind of processors, there's also things called readers and writers. If we want to select on this, we see that there's no current services. So if we want to create a new service, so for our reader service, we want to use something like the CSV reader. There's a bunch of different options we can have, but we'll do CSV reader, and then we'll create it. And once it's created, I'll go ahead and create both first, and then we'll take a look at some configurations we might need to set on it. So for record writer, we'll do JSON record writer. And then we'll hit apply. And then once we know it's saved. So you would need to enable these readers and writers as well. So what you could do is you can click on this little arrow, and it'll take you to the controller services tab. And you see here that the lightning sign is currently off. So we need to hit enable. But before we enable it, we're going to edit the configurations of the CSV reader. There are some things we need to adjust in here. Is instead of using infer schema as the schema access, because we have the header within our single flow files, we're going to use string fields from header. And hit OK. So that way it just recognizes it top down, or line 1 to line 1, or line 1, line 2, line 1, line 2, etc. And then there are other options you have set. So say if you're working with TSV or some other separated value text file, you can also adjust the value separator, etc. And then also what we'll want to do is treat first line as header to true. So again, to ignore the first line. And that's pretty much all the configuration we have to do for a CSV writer. And we'll go ahead and hit apply, and then we'll go ahead and turn it on. And again, for the scope, we can do service only or service and referencing components. So if you have a much more complex data flow, you can add even more configuration and adjustments based on what can be used where, et cetera, et cetera. But because we'll just do service only, and that's what we're working with. It's now enabled. And for JSON record set writer, we'll look at the configurations, but we don't need to change anything. So we can write the schema. There's a couple of different options here. And then schema access strategy, et cetera. We can pretty print the JSON if needed. And then other items as else. So if you want to potentially change the output grouping, you could do array, one line, et cetera. And so I'm just going to go ahead and turn it on. All right. And now that both of these services are on, we'll go ahead and rerun the entire flow. And so ideally what we should see here is 1,000 row or 1,000 flow files that are now JSON format. So we see our file here. It's going to get picked up and we should see 1,000 splits once that happens. There we go. And then almost these happened simultaneously, but from the 1 here, it went to 1,000 here and it went to 1,000 here. So if we look at this queue and we open it up and we see line 1 and we see view, we now see JSON format of records. So if we actually want to see it in like a prettier or prettified JSON, we can see it as is here. There are other items to where if you want to flatten the arrays, you can potentially do that as well. But yeah, so what we've done is taken 1,000 row CSV with the header, and we've converted them into single JSON formatted records that we could then potentially move into a SQL database, move into a NoSQL database, move into Kafka, move into some other form of tool that you can then put back into your pipeline. So as an end-to-end tool, it could also be used, but it could also be used, or Nifi can be used as an end-to-end tool, but it can also be used as a in between different processing steps. So if there's certain methods where you don't want to do a whole ton of coding just to do some kind of data transformation, Nifi might be a potential option. But yeah, that wraps up the introduction demo to Nifi. Again, we can then expand on this, as I mentioned, so do something like put it into Kafka and then have Kafka do something with it, or put it into Kafka, pull it back out of Kafka. So yeah, that will wrap up the demo. I'll open the floor to see if anyone has any questions or comments. Feel free. Oh, sorry. Before we get there, I should also show you how to export and import templates. Forgot about that. Sorry. So if we want to do this, we can then we can multi-select the items, and then we can do a create template. So we can call this CSV to JSON, and we do create. All right. So then if we create that, so I'm going to go up one item. Let me zoom out a bit. Let's move this over. So if we do templates, and we drag and drop, and we add it. So now we've configured something that we can drag and drop and move around. So if we want to download it, we can also, or yeah, we just do, is it this one? Nope, it is, I think it's in templates, and then where'd it go? There we go. And then we download it. And then if we want to add it, so if we go back to templates and we remove this, yep. And then if we go into the UI and we see this little up arrow, so that's the way to upload templates. And then you would just, or you would just hit the upload or the search magnified, and it'll take you into your directories or your local directories to download it. But yeah, or upload it. Apologies. But yeah, that will wrap up the demo. And let's see. Mike has a question. If you have a CSV with some records with incomplete data, how can we ignore those records? So I believe there are methods to where you can, it might be in the actual service of it, but you can ignore null rows, I believe. Let's see, null strings. Nope. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing it. I don't remember because again, the ecosystem's kind of expansive, so I don't know every single processor by heart. It's probably possible, honestly, because you can just say look for this potential rejects and then set it to this. I don't think that would be like not a functionality, so that might be. You might just need to look into it, Mike. Apologies.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been over here multitasking, so I hope my question isn't dumb if I, missed something that you already covered.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you run into some kind of limitation with Nifi. If you're, I don't know, a connector, for example, and you needed to execute some custom code. Does it have the capability to execute a script, or would that be something you have to do outside of Nifi and then point Nifi to the results of whatever that script was doing?
Yeah, it looks like there's a processor that can execute a script. So if we click on this, and then we'll see what options there are. So script engine, so I'm assuming different languages, Python. So there might be some limitations of what you could use as your script, but again, Python's a pretty prevalent data engineering language.
Yep.
So, and then you might just need to have a script file that you have the path to. So it looks like you might be able to do that using this execute script. But there are other potential processors. So you can just literally, so I mentioned there's a ton of processors in the ecosystem. So if you're looking for a very specific tool, you can just search for it. And you can also search for it on their docs because they have every processor in their docs and more information on them.
Okay. And my second question, because I work a lot with SSIS, so I'm kind of looking at this through that lens. Your little connectors that connect the components, can you, assign like expressions to them so you don't execute the next task unless the first one was completed, or if it failed, then do something else, or maybe even check the output value from a previous component and then decide what you want to do in your next step. Do you have those kind of capabilities?
I believe so. I haven't built anything.
So in SSIS, for example, you see where you have your little connectors. I think they call them precedent constraints. You would right mouse that, and then you get some options there.
Let's see. That might be something I would have to look into. I don't think why not, right? There might be some method of, because there are some methods of like the relationships are relatively simple in terms of what to do on something. So like on failure, I can say redo it, right? But I can't speak to the question that you're having without having had a deeper look yet.
Okay. What about variables? You can set variables within it.
I believe so. I think they're done within the, yeah,
Yep,
right
I see.
here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, so the reason why I wanted to come to this presentation because I picked up a data engineering book. I mean, I think probably most of us have been doing data engineering for years, maybe, but they weren't calling it data engineering. But in that book, it mentioned Nifi, or however you pronounce it. And so when I saw this pop up, I said, okay, I'll check this out rather than try and read through a book. But yeah, part of my motivation is to just kind of expand beyond kind of the enterprise SSIS kind of tools into using more open source kind of tooling with programs like this, and scripting with Python, that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're interested on learning NiFi for yourself and then creating some sort of demo, we could do that, and then you can also present it here if you're interested.
Sure.
That would be a cool demo to see as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the sort of computational requirements, because NiFi is doing the processing itself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so which is different from a lot of other like data flow orchestration systems like Airflow or some of the others, where the processing happens in some other system. So can you elaborate a little bit more on like what a typical hardware setup would look like?
Yeah,
and
they have a pretty decent like architecture diagram. Yeah.
Mhm.
So of how like they do mention, let me see where it is. If you want to operate within a cluster, because I have run into some like resource allocation issues, and so I wasn't able to process as much data as I wanted, but it may have been due to the constraint of the Git pod container. That's why I kind of scaled down.
That makes
So
sense.
I think it mentions it in terms of, yeah, right here, like scale out. So like I remember reading it. I'm just trying to find so I don't spew the wrong information.
Nope.
Yeah, so right here, so it's like for IO, for CPU, for RAM, because it lives in the JVM, is limited by memory space. So garbage collection becomes important. So depending on the amount of processing you're doing in your job,
Right,
hardware might come into play. So you might need to play with like RAM configuration, or potentially like CPU monitoring based on
right.
if you're overclocking or underclocking.
Yep, that makes sense. And from what you've seen, is when NiFi runs into hardware limitations for a particular job, how graceful is the degradation?
So it doesn't stop.
Good,
It
good.
doesn't just die.
It doesn't just. It's always good when it doesn't fall over.
Yeah, it had little flags. So like if I go back to the UI, it had like a little a red box that showed up here, and it'll have like little cautions, and it would show you logs of what's happening. So it would tell you like the source of the error and the reason for the error. And it kept, I think it kept continued trying to move on, but didn't, because the resources were just weren't enough. The queue just didn't get filled. So it kind of like hard stopped on itself just because it couldn't process it.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So that was one thing I noticed there, is like, because sometimes if you overload something, it'll just crash and die, and then you gotta start and reconfigure everything. But yeah, luckily NiFi didn't do that. That may have just been happened once for me, but I can't speak to every instant or every use case of like overloading NiFi. But then again, that's where potential clusters come into play, right? So you could have like configurations of like, let's go to configure. you can set things to run on like certain nodes. So you could say run this all nodes. So like concurrent tasks. So if you have something that, like for this get file, if we had a cluster and we have concurrent task 1 and all nodes execution, I believe the way that it's set, it would run the get file on each node. So if you have 3 nodes, it would be get file, get file, get file. But if you wanted to change it to only the primary node, I think it would only run once. Or you could set potentially concurrent task to 0 as well to adjust for that. But again, depending on your data flow, you might need concurrent tasks, but that's something to research into.
Right, that makes sense. And as far as like use cases go, the examples you used in the demo of taking a file and moving it or serializing it, it's a good example. Within like what sort of destinations would you want to use Nifi for? Are you thinking mostly like, oh, looks like you've got a nice list over there.
Yeah, so there's, you can convert the JSON to SQL and then potentially put it into like a SQL database. There's also HDFS related things. I think there's some Amazon connectors, Dynamo, Kinesis. Put essentially just means write. So if you see put, it just means write something.
Right.
So also AWS, Azure. I know there's Cassandra related ones as well, which I'll probably do a topic on. Just extending this to then take what we have and put it into Cassandra, or make a little bit better. But like there's options of like you have your ingress, egress, like source and destinations. From what I've seen, there's a fair amount of databases or other tools. I don't know if there was an option for Spark. Yeah, but Kafka is one. Maybe Rabbit. Yep. See, probably Flink. No. Splunk. Yeah. So you could potentially use this for monitoring. So if you need to put stuff into Splunk, like error logs or something, Nifi might be a way to pick up your logs from some kind of service and then dump them into Splunk. One way potentially.
Yep.
Yeah, but you can literally just go on their docs and search. They have a filter. So if I just do the same filter, we see the same exact things.
That is very cool. And so they're with a, say, getting like a CSV file from an external SFTP server and then putting that into Cassandra, you could just do that entirely within the Nifi web browser.
Yeah. Granted, you would just need to run Cassandra, but yeah.
Topic for another day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. It sounds like in that case, getting Nifi set up would take longer than actually building that flow for that use case.
Probably, if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I have one more question too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how is the login working? Just kind of out of the box. So you set up your flow, your packages, your flows, and you have them executing. Where's that execution info being saved? How is that accessed?
I believe there are repositories here, so certain things get updated in this content repository. So I think these are related to the processor. Let me see. Yeah, so the actual bytes of a given flow file. So that's where it's like that RAM issue kind of comes into play. So if you have like 300,000 flow files and you don't have the RAM for it, that might get an issue. But I think if you want to see individual, nope, I want to go here. I think it's not the status history. I'm going to stop this for a second. I think it's No, that's not the one. I know it's somewhere. I don't remember exactly where. So this flow configuration history. I think it would be this one, the data provenance, so you can see what's happening to your data. And then the actual like bytes of it would get stored to like wherever Nifi is local.
Okay, and if the process completed, if it failed, that would be something that's, I would expect to see that in the file somewhere. Like execution started at this time, it ended at this time. This is how many records came through the pipeline. It succeeded or it failed.
Yeah,
That kind of information.
Yeah, I'm trying to
have to read through the docs.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where. I remember seeing it was somewhere in this like flow file repository. So if we look at that flow file.
So it'll probably be saving them as JSON docs.
Okay, this journal file. I don't want to break this yet. I would need to look further in terms of where the logs are getting stored. That might be something you could configure.
Hello, I don't know if you go back to the previous tab. I think I can see a log directory. I don't know if it should be there.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so successfully checkpointed. So I guess it's based off checkpoints. Yeah, so it looks like it's potentially creating new logs. So this is what, 1659. Oh yeah, see, it's happening in real time. So yeah, you for your purpose, you might just need to take a look at how it's doing it and see if it applies.
Yep. Thanks.
Yep.
Hello, I have a question. I think I wrote it in the chat. Based on the use case that I think it was Will that said it, when you have to get some file from an FTP server, and then maybe load it in a relational database with a Postgres or something like that. Can you have dynamic names? Like, for example, if there's a file that's generated on the FTP server on daily basis, okay, and you have to run, will I say, the flow every day, can it dynamically get maybe the date of today and then use it to concatenate in the name of the file is meant to get from the FTP server?
You might be able to using variables potentially, or using some kind of regex. I haven't played with it, so I'm not sure. So if looking at the so there's a file filter, a path filter. Yeah, you may just need to see if you can, because I'm currently unsure if that's potentially an option.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. I'll check the logs and try more on this.
Great. So yeah, that will wrap it up. We are at the top of the hour. I'd like to say thank you everyone for coming out. Great questions, and we will see you all next week. Have a great day.